Welcome to this afternoon's Aging Research at King's webinar, and especially this is our first in a series of webinars on commercialization pathways of longevity innovation. My name is Richard Siow. I'm the Director of Aging Research at King's, and we have two wonderful speakers this afternoon. First of all, our new ARK Entrepreneur in Residence, Svitlana Surodina, will be speaking. And she joined us earlier on this year, beginning of January. And she's also affiliated with the Department of Informatics at the King's Faculty of Natural and Mathematical Sciences. And I'm also delighted to welcome a friend of ARK, Professor Joao Pedro from University of Liverpool, who many of you will know, and he will also be speaking. I'll introduce him a little further after Svitlana's first talk. So this launches our new series, and some of you may know that we are focusing on academic industry partnerships and commercialization opportunities for academic longevity research, and also bringing in commercial partners, industry partners to the academic environment. So both spinning out and also spinning in to our academic research. We're also building both national and also global networks of aging and longevity research centers, both in industry and also academic partners. And Svitlana will say a few words about that during her talk. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Svitlana, who will speak first, and the title of her talk is Caloric Restriction Mimetics, Commercialization Pathways of Longevity Innovation. So I'll hand over to Svitlana. Thank you very much. I think you're live, maybe I'm not.
Thank you, Richard, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. My short presentation today, I will introduce myself and tell you a bit more about ARK, the vision, and what we are working on to achieve in the space of longevity commercialization. We then will look into the requirements, challenges, and opportunities that commercialization of longevity-related innovation presents, and how AI and quantifiable data approaches can help to develop the innovation ecosystem. I look into examples of a breakthrough research of calorie restriction mimetics that will be further expanded by Professor de Magalhães. Firstly, a bit about myself. My name is Svitlana Surodina. I'm a digital technology entrepreneur. I founded and developed several companies. I also was directly involved in over 150 projects where I led product development team, was involved in technical implementation, or worked on business digital strategy. One of the companies I co-founded, Scain, has been developing AI and software solutions using agile lean design thinking methodology since 2009, counting among its clients universities, scale-ups, corporations like Sky and TP-Link, won various project funding, including from European Commission, and had been a Crown commercial services supplier since 2009. I have an MBA degree from the University of Oxford, and I'm currently conducting a PhD research in computer science at King's College London, which is funded by ARK. And you can see my faculty office in Kingsway in my background. I'm honored to have recently joined the amazing team at ARK as an entrepreneur in residence. ARK stands for Aging Research at King's. It's a truly unique organization that brings together industry and academia, creating an international community of innovators who work across disciplines on the challenges and opportunities of longevity. It focuses on bringing to market some of the most advanced innovation in the space and has special focus on leveraging advanced data technology and artificial intelligence. ARK is also global. It partners with organizations across the UK and internationally, such as University of California, University of Zurich, National University of Singapore, Peking University, and many others. And It works to bring together researchers, investors, and commercial companies to develop go-to-market strategies and commercialization models for innovation for healthier, longer lives, so extended understanding of aging and health, as well as longevity. And incidentally, it's also one of the fastest growing and attractive investment areas at the moment. So just to give you a bit of background, for example, in addition to prevention of potential of prevention and improving well-being across the whole life cycle, older consumers now present a unique market opportunity. Just to illustrate this point, median family wealth of over 62s in the US is $200,000, comparing to only $14,000 of younger families, which obviously see at a large extent the disposable income available for age prevention and age-related disease handling. However, commercialization of breakthrough research in aging faces several unique challenges. Much of the research basic or fundamental stage, which creates a very high risk, high reward scenarios, and with the absence of business models, it is often hard to reliably evaluate potential economic impact and therefore value such research. It's also naturally a very long period of validation in human experiments and multiple approval challenges. In silico research using data analytics poses a great opportunity for addressing these challenges. Challenges for all the stakeholders and participants in the ecosystem. However, access to diverse human data for research, personalization, and product development requires an efficient technological infrastructure for data exchange, valuation, and protection. At the Department of Informatics, we are conducting research into such infrastructure that would enable valuing and sharing data while preserving privacy, ownership, and create market-enabling mechanisms, such as personal data on-chain smart contracts. Unlocking value of personal data across the longevity innovation investment value chain is part of our research. We engage investors, innovators, industry, and individuals. I'll skip technology part for the sake of the speed, but going more into pilot projects. At ARK, we're currently conducting commercialization focused pilot projects with focus on leveraging data for creating market opportunities. Today, Professor de Magalhães will talk about calorie restriction memetics and other his revolutionary work that he's conducting. And another example of project we're currently engaged in is a partnering with a market leader that delivers mass personalization of preventive curative healthcare through epigenetics. We are interested to hear from researchers and innovators who work with human data and want to bring their research to market, as well as other organizations within the ecosystem, including investors and technology innovators. As a next step, we invite you to join us in our mission. Get in touch via email, follow ARK on LinkedIn or Twitter, or just find me on LinkedIn and we can talk about partnership opportunities. So just to summarize, my main takeaways, longevity is a major commercial opportunity. ARK is a platform that supports aging research and real-world application projects. AI and data technologies are key to longevity innovation, and let's partner, join our community and research program. Thank you, and I hope I did fit into my 10-minute slot, and I will leave it to Dr. de Magalhães to talk about his work.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Svitlana. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to discuss this very, I think, timely topics. Let me I have a few slides. Let me share this. And go. So can you see my slides? My screen is acting up a little bit. Okay. Can you see my slides now?
We can see your slides, but you may need to make it full screen.
I have made it full screen, at least for me. Wait, we'll do the old computer trick. I'll stop sharing, and then I'll start sharing again. Okay, so let's try again. Let's share the content again. Okay.
Yep, that's much better, Pedro.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
It's good. Is it full screen now?
Yep, full screen now. Go ahead.
Okay, awesome.
Thanks.
So again, thank you for the opportunity and the invitation. It's Richard and Svitlana, and I think these are quite timely topics. So I mean, Svitlana touched upon it a little bit. I will do a brief introduction as well to really why we are in this situation where longevity science is this big emergent business opportunity, and there's lots of opportunities for commercialization. Then I'll tell you a little bit about some of projects we've been involved, and a little about the current landscape of longevity, pharmacology, and biotech in general. So let me start just with a brief introduction. As I'm sure you're aware, we are living longer lives than ever before in the history of humankind. So roughly 150 years ago, our life expectancy was about 40, 45. So that has been radically increasing or substantially increasing in the past 150 years. So now we have life expectancy in industrialized countries over 80. So thanks to various technological advances, antibiotics, and advances in medicine, sanitation, various medical, technological advances, and we're now living much longer lives. But of course, I'm sure you're aware, the fact that we're living longer lives also means that the incidence and mortality from age-related diseases has now increased. And so we now are in a situation where we have this graying of the population, where the major killers in modern societies and in the world are age-related diseases. So this is data from the US, but it's not very different from data from the UK, where you see that the major causes of death will be age-related diseases like heart diseases, cancer, cardiovascular diseases, and neurodegenerative diseases. You also have infectious diseases that are particularly cause of death particularly in older individuals. So on one hand, yes, I think it's a huge triumph of technology in the commercialization that we have now advanced and that we've curbed infant mortality and we're now living much longer. But on the other hand, we have much greater incidence of these age-related diseases. So this is a major biomedical societal challenge. Now, as I'm sure you're aware as well, we're working from home. We are doing this online. We're doing this webinar online, and we've been working from home and online for about a year now. And the reason for that, of course, is because of COVID-19. And COVID-19 is very striking in age-related diseases. So this is data from China that I got last year, but it's not very different again from data from the UK. And what you see, this is mortality of COVID-19 by age. And what you see is that mortality of COVID-19 in individuals younger than 40 or 50 is very low, negligible in children, although it can happen in exceptional cases. But then once you reach about age 50, the mortality starts to increase exponentially, and it is substantial in elderly individuals. So COVID-19 is very clearly an age-related disease, and I'm actually optimistic that, well, there's been a lot of disruption to research from the pandemic. The overall lessons that we learn from the pandemic is that we need more research. We need more research into aging, into why this happened. I mean, what changes these individuals for us to be much more susceptible to infectious diseases in older individuals, which is still not well understood. So I'm hoping we will understand better, or we will be more aware of these challenges that we face of an aging population because of COVID-19. So hopefully, we know that we're focused, or the importance of focusing on aging, the importance of focusing on longevity science. Just a brief history of biogerontology, of the study of the biology of aging. So if you look into the older literature, it's something I enjoy doing. It's actually a photo from a beautiful library in my hometown of Porto called Lelo. If you go to Porto, I very strongly recommend you visit. So when you look back into 30 years ago, the study of aging was not particularly popular. So one of the pioneers in the field, Cynthia Kenyon, she said that when she started working on aging in the early 90s, she said that a colleague told her that she would fall off the edge of the earth if she were to study aging. So studying aging and studying longevity were not particularly popular 30 years ago. But there's been a lot of advances, conceptual advances and technical advances since then. I guess the major revolution is that we now know that the process of aging is surprisingly plastic in animals, thanks to work of Cynthia Kenyon, Tom Johnson, and others. So we know we can tweak genes that allows us to manipulate aging in animal models. So Tom Johnson and colleagues identified the first genetic variant significantly associated with longevity in this tiny microscopic worms, C. elegans. And we now know we can tweak individual genes in worms and extend lifespan by over 10 times. So instead of these animals living just a few weeks, they can live for several months. So this has been, I think, a conceptual revolution in the way we see the process of aging, because it means that the process of aging is not immutable. Quite the contrary, to certain levels, we can manipulate aging in animals. So one of the things that my lab actually maintains, I've always found this fascinating, this ability of us manipulating aging in animals by tweaking a single gene, or we know by diet it's also possible. I won't talk too much about diet today, but I'll talk a little bit about pharmacological interventions. We can manipulate aging. So back when I was a PhD student, I actually started, keeping track of all of this genes that impact on aging and longevity in animal models. So I created this database, which is now arguably the benchmark in the field, called the GeneAge database of aging-related genes. I think it's a great illustration of really how much we've advanced. So if you look at worms, we now know about nearly 900 genes in worms that when you tweak them, when you activate them or suppress them or mutate them, significantly impact on longevity. And even in mice, we know of over 100 genes. And we can increase lifespan in mice by up to 50%. So again, it's quite remarkable. We can also accelerate aging in mice. So this is, you see, two mice of the same age. But the mice on the right has a mutation. I believe this is in ERCC2, which is, details are not important. It's a gene involved, protein involved in DNA damage responses. But the point is that we can tweak it. We mutate a single gene in mice, and it accelerates the aging process of the animals and reduces lifespan. And conversely, we can mutate genes and slow down the process of aging. So again, these are two animals of roughly the same age, but the animal in the bottom, that's not younger, but it has a mutation in growth hormone signaling, which, as the name implies, makes us grow. So this tend to be quite cute little animals, but they also live significantly longer, up to 50% longer. And it's not that these animals, when we genetically manipulate them to extend lifespan, it's not that just live longer, they live longer healthier. So it postpones various age-related diseases. I mean, they will still age, they will still die, they will still develop diseases, but they do so much later than for normal animals. So really, I think it's a massive change in the way we see the process of aging. We know that the aging process is plastic, and really it's a vindication of the work of Kenyon, Tom Johnson, and others. And of course, then the big question is, okay, can we apply this to humans? Can we somehow learn from these discoveries in animal models and apply them to extend human longevity, to extend human health, to preserve human health, and retard human diseases? Now, we know in humans, of course, we cannot really change genes the way we can in animal models. But we know there's a genetic basis to human longevity. I mean, I'll show you just one quick example, but there's quite a bit of work on this, which is from Jean Calment, which is the longest human being on record, who lived to be 122. And she's a great example of the power of genetics, because she used to eat lots of chocolate. She was very fond of port wine from my hometown, and she smoked until very late in her life. She actually only stopped smoking because she was afraid her eyesight was getting worse, and she was afraid she would hurt herself, burn herself with a cigarette. So she's a great example, and she's not an only case. We know that centenarians, when you study them they don't really have lifestyle factors in common. However, longevity tends to run in the family. So centenarians tend to have other relatives that tend to be quite long-lived. I mean, my grandmother is actually a centenarian now, and again, she didn't have the healthiest. I mean, she didn't exercise, she didn't eat that healthy, and she turns out to be quite long-lived. And that is not a unique case. So we know that longevity runs in families, and we can actually estimate, and that there's some work actually from King's, from the work of Tim Spector on in twins, that we know there are a genetic component to longevity, and that genetic component increases with age. So what that means is that if you want to be a healthy 70 or 80-year-old, you have to follow your mother's advice and have a healthy lifestyle. On the other hand, if you want to be a centenarian, it's mostly about choosing your parents and grandparents. So it is mostly genetic. So we know that there is a genetic basis to aging in animal models, and we know there's a genetic basis to longevity in humans, although we don't understand well which genes are involved in human longevity. But ultimately, we don't just want to understand this, we want to develop interventions. We want to intervene in the process of aging. And if we could do that the way we can in animal models, that would be brilliant, because as I said before, mice, when you extend the lifespan, they're not just living longer, they're living longer healthier. They're like turning a 70-year-old with the health and body of a 50-year-old. So that's what we can do in animals, and that's what we would like to do in humans. So it's not just extending lifespan and longevity per se, it's extending health span. And that's a very important concept, because people want to live longer in good health so they can enjoy the extra years of life, not just live longer in a period of decrepitude. And at least in animal models and in centenarians, that is exactly what we see. It's a longer lifespan, but in good health. So what about intervening? We can't really do genetic manipulations in humans, at least not yet. Well, there's also a lot of pharmacological interventions that we now know retard aging in animal models. I mean, here on the left, this is rapamycin, which in mice extends lifespan about 15%. So the effects are not as massive as what you see by genetic manipulations, but now we know of several compounds that extend lifespan in animal models, including in mice. And in fact, this is, I think, an area that's been, what I call longevity pharmacology, is really an area that's been exploding. I mean, one of the, another database that we maintain is called DrugAge, a database of age-related drugs. So these would be drugs that extend longevity in at least one model system. And it's quite remarkable, the increase you see. So this is, we see an exponential increase in recent years. So there's been work on this topic for many years, but clearly there is an explosion in the past half a dozen years or so in discovering new drugs associated with longevity. So there's a lot of interest in this topic. And for example, when you look at genes associated with aging, you see an increase, but it seems to be leveling off. In other words, it seems like perhaps the major pathways and the major groups of genes associated with longevity have been discovered already. So there's still discoveries to be made, but it seems to have leveled off. Or by contrast, at the level of longevity drugs, we are still in an exponential phase. And I think that's because I think there's a combination of reasons for that. I mean, one of them is there's been this shift in the field from just genetics to longevity interventions, in particular pharmacological interventions, of both companies, but also scientists wanting to be more translational. So we see this explosion in longevity drugs, longevity pharmacology. And this is accompanied as well by this large, fast growth in the anti-aging biotech sector. I mean, when I started in the field of aging, there was barely any companies. So this was about 20 years ago when I was doing my PhD, and there were barely any companies working on anti-aging. There was Geron, which was focusing on telomerase. And there was a couple more companies, but that was about it. And now we have a number of companies focused. The most famous of which, arguably, is Calico, which is a company that was started by Google. It was on the cover of Time magazine, I think in 2013, if I remember correctly. But there's various other companies, Juvenescence here in the UK from Jim Mellon, Unity, which has some funding from Jeff Bezos, the wealthiest man in the world at the moment. So we see big players investing in some of these companies, which makes sense because really, as Svitlana pointed out before, there is a huge market, and you see this growing of the population. You see older individuals that want to live longer, that want to live healthier. So really, this market for longevity is huge, and it's only going to increase in the future. So when you look at the major players in this space of longevity business or longevity biotech, so clearly by investment, and of course this is based on information that is publicly available. So by far the major player is Calico, this company started by Google. But you have other important players, Human Longevity, which is a company from Craig Venter. As I mentioned, Unity, which has Jeff Bezos as one of their investors. So you have various companies, and I think it's very interesting and very positive that we see all of this growing investment in longevity companies. I mean, they will work on different topics, which I'll come back to in a minute or two. But you see this really widening landscape and growing landscape in terms of longevity biotech, which I think is very interesting. Now, when you look at what are these companies focusing on? So they work on different things, but there are some patterns, there are some common patterns. So I think quite a few of these companies work on oxidative stress and mitochondria, which is something that has been traditionally associated with aging for decades. I mean, Damon Harmon put forward his free radical theory of aging in the 50s. So, the idea that oxidative stress is important in aging, I would say it's arguable, but it's been around for many years, decades. So that is the focus of some of these companies. I think there's been a renewed interest in targeting senescent cells and developing senolytics. So senolytics are compounds that destroy senescent cells without harming other cells. So that is another topic that's been known for many decades since the work of Leonard Hayflick, that I think has been receiving a renewed interest in recent years. And then you have a number of companies focusing on mediators of dietary restriction. So we know that if you restrict the amount of calories or other components or some other components in a diet, you're going to have animals live longer, healthier lives. So I mean, in mice and rats, we can extend lifespan by up to 50%, although it varies a little bit between strains. So you'll have a number of companies also focusing on this particular mediators, and like, for example, targeting mTOR, which is the target of rapamycin, which, as I mentioned earlier, extends lifespan in mice, and NAD+, and other, let's call it metabolic mediators of lifespan. So these are some of the major areas of focus of this anti-aging biotechs. And I go into it in a bit more detail in this article, which is in press, but it's available online now in Drug Discovery Today. I mean, one of the things as sort of as a side point that I would point out is that I do think, however, that there is somewhat of a relatively narrow focus of anti-aging biotech. So yes, you have different companies working on different topics, but there's only a limited number of topics that this company is focusing on. And I actually think if we want to drive, particularly because we don't really know why human beings age. So I do think there's a lot of space for innovation, for targeting new genes, new pathways, new mechanisms. I think there is a lot of room for it because we don't understand well the mechanisms of human aging. We have some hypotheses, but we don't understand them well. So I do think that there's room for more out-of-the-box thinking. So actually, with that in mind, I should mention that one of the companies I'm involved in is a company called Centaura, which is based in Switzerland. But we now have, we have a lab in Moscow. We've recently opened a lab in Boston as well. So I'm the CSO of Centaura, and our focus is a little different. It's not so much in pharmacological approaches, as I think there's quite a few companies working on that as well. But our focus is more on developing technologies, in particular gene and cell therapies, using, for example, artificial chromosomes that allows us to more radical approaches to not just slowing aging, but potentially reversing aging. So it's a high risk, high reward approach that I think is quite interesting as well. So I think it's quite an innovative and ambitious approach. But if it works out, it will have greater effects at the level of intervening in aging, which I think is quite interesting. And I don't have time to go into a lot of details of what we're doing, but happy to answer any questions later. And you're welcome also to visit our website. Now, so going back, okay, so we have a lot of different companies, most of them, but not all, pharmacological approaches. But there's a lot of obstacles to developing a commercial product. Svitlana briefly touched upon. One of the things that there's few companies that have survived on the long term. I think I mentioned Geron was around when I started. Geron, it's even arguable whether they still focus on aging. They mostly focus on cancer at the moment. So it's even debatable whether they're an anti-aging biotech. So very few companies survive. And that's, well, there's traditional problems in drug discovery and regulatory approval and so on. But I think there's also problems in aging itself. If you're studying aging, I think we have limitations that other fields don't have. We don't understand well the biological basis of human aging. And we don't have suitable models. We have animal models, but they're not perfect representations of human aging. And if you want to study aging in humans, we're talking about very long, time-consuming clinical trials. And so most companies, they tend to focus on particular diseases, for example. Although, as you may be aware, near Barzilai and others in the US are trying to develop a first clinical trial for aging to test the effects of metformin, which I think would be a real breakthrough in establishing biomarkers and readouts for a specific, well, for developing a clinical trial for aging. And this is data from the whole industry, not just aging, but biotech, is that only a very small percentage of drug candidates is actually approved for commercialization. And again, that's because of various hurdles along the way. Some of them, biological, because preclinical models are not perfect models of human biology. So that would be one of the problems. So the point is that there's a lot of obstacles to commercialization. And of course, model organisms, as I said before, that's a particular concern because we have a poor, I would argue, a poor understanding of human aging, And as I briefly touched upon, we also don't understand well the genetic basis of human longevity. So we know a lot. I think we're in a situation now in the field of biogerontology, of aging and longevity research, where we have I would say a certainly growing understanding of aging and longevity manipulations in animal models. We have a growing understanding of genetic manipulations and genetic pathways that modulate aging and longevity in animal models, and a growing understanding of pharmacological interventions. But we still have a poor understanding of genetics and biology of human aging, genetics of human longevity. That is still something we have a poor understanding of. Now, I think this is where some of the data-driven approaches come in. I mean, in the last few minutes, I'll just briefly touch upon some of the works we've been doing. I mean, it's a photo of me pretending to work with that machine. I mean, the point is actually that this kind of machines, the DNA sequencing, is that it's a lot cheaper and faster to sequence your genome, to sequence the genome of centenarians, for example, which is something we've been involved in. So we're in a point where really the bottleneck of research is not so much in generating data, but in analyzing that data. So we have a large amount of data being generated, both by academic labs, by hospitals, in the clinic, health data, health records. You know, there is really a huge amount of data being generated. And really the shift is from just generating data to analyzing it. And that is something that my lab and myself have been quite involved in. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples without going into a lot of details in the interest of time. So in terms of in silico approaches or computational approaches, I mean, we've done various types of works in network and data-driven approaches. I mean, so this would be an example of a network here, where each of the dots would be a gene or a protein. And then you can look at connections between these genes, for example, based on protein-protein interactions or gene co-expression. So you can build networks. And we know phenotypes like longevity and aging, they're not derived by single genes, but derived by networks of interacting genes and proteins with each other and with the environment. So we employ various methods that I don't have time to go into detail for analyzing these networks, for analyzing these components of the system and how they interact with each other. To give one quick example, this was a study we published last year in genome biology, where we applied these approaches to study cellular senescence. These are senescent cells, photos I actually took during my PhD. I did my PhD on cellular senescence. And basically, we derive various gene expression signatures, we derive networks of genes associated with cell senescence. And based on that, we can make predictions, and we can then test those experimentally, which was done in collaboration with Cleo Bishop in London, to discover new genes regulating cell senescence. What we can then do, which I think is very interesting as well, is then go to human data. Because, okay, we can have data from cell models, but what about human beings? So we can also look into human tissues and see, all right, so do the signatures of cell senescence occur in human tissues as well? And what we see is that, yes, we see signatures of cell senescence in human tissues, but not in all tissues, not in all organs. So there are exceptions. And again, that may help determine which tissues, which organs would better benefit, for example, for senolytics. So my point is that, and I'm skipping some methodological details here, but the point is that we can take some of these data-driven approaches and also look into human data to better inform which targets, which genes are going to be more suitable for human applications. Let me show you another example. So what we did here, this is, again, I'll skip a lot of the methodological details, but so we know there's gene expression signatures of caloric restriction, of life-extending interventions. And you can also obtain gene expression signatures of drugs, you know. So what we basically did was, okay, can we find drugs whose gene expression signatures overlap with those of life extension, namely caloric restriction? And we did this analysis. It's called a network pharmacology approach. So we tried to find these compounds. And it was interesting. The top compound was rapamycin, which was a compound that we know extends lifespan. And some people argue works by caloric restriction, is a caloric restriction mimetic. So then we went into C. elegans. We went to test this in worms. So, and 5 of the drugs we tested, 4 of them extended lifespan in worms in a caloric restriction related manner. So we were able to discover new, well, one of those drugs was rapamycin, which was a sort of positive control. We were able to find new caloric restriction mimetics in C. elegans. And so now what we're trying to do is, on one hand, trying to do some experiments in mammalian models, but also some of these drugs are used by people already. So trying to go back into health records and see, do individuals who take some of these compounds, are they aging slower in some way? And this is something we're exploring with Inspector actually in King's College and with other colleagues. So that's how we're trying to push from going from a computational analysis to experiment in an invertebrate model, ideally to all the way to a clinical application. I mean, that's what I would like. I don't know if we'll get there, but that would be the ultimate aim. Now, the other thing we're doing is applying machine learning and artificial intelligence approaches in aging. Again, I don't have time to go into a lot of detail, but so I would recommend, if you're interested in the topic, we did this review a few years back with Alex Freitas, my long-term collaborator in University of Kent, which reviews the application of machine learning to aging. The way I usually explain machine learning is, so you sometimes see on Facebook or websites, there's these websites that allow you to determine or to estimate what is your Game of Thrones character. And you go on these websites and, they ask you some questions, basically I want to know some of your characteristics, like, are you a man or a woman? Do you like to kill people? Yes or no? Typical questions they would ask. And then they would match your characteristics to those of the Game of Thrones characters. That's basically what it does. And that uses a machine learning algorithm. So the same way you can do that for determining your Game of Thrones character, it also can be used, for example, to identify new genes associated with aging, or new compounds extending lifespan, or new drugs, longevity drugs. So that's something we've done. I don't have time to go into in detail. I'll just point out a paper we published a few years back on applying machine learning for predicting life-extending compounds. We're working on another manuscript now also on applying some of these methods for gene function prediction in the context of cognitive aging. But that is really, that's the point of machine learning. The other thing, if you work on bioinformatics or more familiar with bioinformatics methods, the other advantage of machine learning is that while bioinformatics or traditional bioinformatics approaches allow you to identify correlations, the advantage of machine learning, at least some machine learning algorithms, is that it allows you to find correlations between different features or different characteristics and different, for example, drugs. So it allows you to do more nonlinear analysis to find hidden patterns in your data that traditional bioinformatics approaches don't. Having said that, in most of my analysis, we have some papers on this, we often tend to employ traditional computational bioinformatics approaches, and we employ machine learning. I see them as synergistic and complementary. So, I mean, the last thing I will mention is one of a side note, but I think would be important in the sense of commercializing longevity interventions. So this was something that we did, that we published last year, sorry, 2019, and we're still focusing on or classifying senescence with the WHO. I'm sure you're aware the WHO at the moment has other priorities with the pandemic, but it is something that we've been discussing and debating and trying to establish a strategy for classifying senescence. With a view that would facilitate, that would make it easier from a regulatory approval perspective to approve longevity drugs, to approve longevity interventions, if we have senescence classified with the WHO. So that's something else we've been working on. So with that, I think I've been over my time now. So well, I'll just summarize that. So clearly intervening, aging is a major challenge of modern societies. And if we could intervene in aging, if we could intervene in human aging, that would be huge, that would be monumental. And we know from animal models that we can intervene in aging, we can manipulate aging, we can slow down aging in animal models by genetic manipulation, and we can do so by drugs as well. So we know of hundreds of longevity drugs now that can extend longevity in animals. Now, of course, the big question is, are they going to work in humans? So that remains the big question. But I think really fostered by these advances in animal models, this ability we have now of manipulate aging in animal models, we have this growing industry of anti-aging biotechs and longevity science. It's a very growing business, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I mean, the growing of the population, it's only going to be worse. So I think when you look 20 or 30 years ahead, this longevity industry is not going to shrink, it's going to increase. So I think it's a very interesting and timely topic. Having said that, of course, there are challenges in translating findings to humans. We know that from other fields of biotech and pharma. We know there are challenges. We know only a very small percentage of drugs become clinically approved. We know a very small percentage of biotechs become successful. Most of them will fail. But as I said, I don't think that will act as a deterrent. I think, if only one intervention is successful in delaying aging, that would already be a huge advance. So I think that's really what we need to focus on. And lastly, I told you about the computational bioinformatics, machine learning, let's call it in silico methods that my lab is developing and applying to, I think, in a way to de-risk these approaches and to prioritize candidates for experiments and ultimately for human translation. And so with that, I mean, let me just thank, as I mentioned, I only really briefly touched upon some of the work we did, but this is, well, obviously it was some time ago already. This is a photo of our lab pre-pandemic already. And these are the various funders of our work. And if you're interested in more work from our lab, feel free to check out our website or drop me an email. And I mean, if we have time, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pedro. I think, yep, everyone can see me now. That was a wonderful talk and really fitting for our first in this series of commercialization pathways for longevity innovation. I realize a number of you joined slightly later, but we now do have about 10 or 15 minutes for some Q&A and also discussion together with Svitlana and Joao Pedro. For those of you who joined late, my name is Richard Siow. I'm the Director of Aging Research at King's, and we are hosting this new series. So maybe I could start the discussion by asking Svitlana to really outline what does it mean to be an entrepreneur in residence, especially for longevity innovation. I think in the UK, there are not many entrepreneurs in residence working in this area. And what do you think you can bring to aging research at King's and also the whole aging longevity ecosystem, both in academia and industry in the UK? So hand over to Svitlana.
That's right, Richard. There's not many entrepreneurs in residence in longevity innovation, and there's not many, or I would say there's only one organization like ARK that's looking at longevity innovation from multidisciplinary perspective and from the point of leveraging academic research for commercialization and for bringing the results of the research into the real world via commercial market pathways. And that was the reason why I decided to join ARK in the first place, because this unique vision and unique approach to not only making research and not only running talks, but actually creating real projects, delivering them to market in an efficient way, and making sure that as many people as possible benefit from those research activities. So hopefully I'm aiming to bring my technology perspective, the experience in rapid innovation and delivery of technology product in the commercial space, and applying this way of innovating to academia, to more traditional way of going through the stages of research and commercialization, making sure we speed up this process and make it as efficient as possible.
Thank you, Svitlana. One of the points that you had made during your talk, apart from this multidisciplinary holistic view of aging longevity through ARK, is the importance to consider financial systems for longer, healthier lives. And that is an area which can't be addressed when we look at animal studies and flies and worms and even primates. But we really do need realistic real-life scenarios to consider the financial implications of aging societies as well. Can you tell us a little bit about how we are potentially engaging with King's Business School and also our Policy Institute to address this issue in aging societies and also the aging workforce? So back to Svitlana.
This is so true, Richard. The longevity challenge is not only about science or medicine or life sciences. It's about the whole society from all the dimensions, and financial aspect is, of course, very important. We live longer, but how do we ensure that we can financially reinforce and support that on an individual level, in the context of organizations, but also as a society? And we definitely need to look for ways to develop new approaches to providing financial planning for longer, healthier lives, more active life. And of course, the role of society, the role of public sector is very important, but of course, economically, and we need to make sure that it's not only theoretical considerations that cannot be implemented. We need to really look at market mechanisms. How can we bring that better and longer life from financial perspective, but also what do we eat, how we work, are we happy enough to live that longer life, right? And it's about market as well as anything else. And from the business school perspective, of course, we are looking at introducing the economical aspect and economics, understanding market mechanisms, understanding how we can value the impact of longevity research, value the impact of health data and personal data, and as well addressing the problem of engaging market participants from the individual up to employer, society, and governments.
That's great. Thank you, Svitlana. One other highlight that through our engagement with our Policy Institute and other colleagues through ARK is that we partner with the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity. And it is very important also to better inform the policymakers and the parliamentarians about the importance of considering this holistic approach to healthy longevity across the lifespan. It's not only about older age, but as you quite rightly say, it's about the societal impact of aging and how we can take care of that at a younger age to reduce the economic burden on the health system. Maybe if I turn now to some questions which the audience have posted in the Q&A. And one for Pedro. What do you think about gene therapy with genetic modifications for restoring youth for the future longevity? Do you think there'll be some limits to the age that we can attain, or what is the ceiling? I think that's what the question is asking.
I mean, that's a good question. I think I would say at the moment, based on what we know, first of all, gene therapy, of course, there's lots of technical issues with it for now, particularly when you're talking about intervening in aging. It is something that, for example, Centauro were exploring. But so, and developing technologies to overcome. But it is, from a technical perspective, not easy. But when you think, okay, so if you think at the theoretical level, I mean, how much younger could we get? I think when you look at experiments like cell reprogramming and cell rejuvenation and Yamanaka factors, it does seem to suggest that at the cell level, we can rejuvenate cells. Now, of course, that's in vitro. I mean, whether that's going to be possible in vivo, it's a different matter. But I would say that I don't see there's anything from a theoretical perspective that would prevent us from reversing aging with gene therapy. But of course, there's a lot of technical challenges to it. But from a theoretical perspective, I don't see any particular limits to it. I think it should be possible, in theory, to rejuvenate tissues all the way to, all the way to developmental stages.
Sure. Thank you, Pedro. There are also some questions in the Q&A about longevity of pharmaceutical agents and therapeutics. Do you think drugs will work to extend healthy lifespan? Are we looking at pharmaceutical interventions, or are we trying to increase the resilience and enhance health, reduce the incidence of age-related decline? Maybe a question again for Joao Pedro.
Yes, I mean, that's a good question. I do think they go hand in hand. If you can, and we know at least in animal models, it is possible. It is possible to intervene from a pharmacological perspective in aging and extend lifespan and preserve health and increase the resilience to diseases. We know that it's possible up to a certain degree. So I'm certainly optimistic about the discovery or the application of longevity drugs to humans. I am optimistic. I mean, there are limits. You can, in mice, you can extend lifespan 10-15% with pharmacological interventions. So there is limits. It's not going to make you live forever. But there are certainly ways that we know work in mammalian models that we now need to explore in clinical trials, and there's companies and academics working on it. So I'm certainly optimistic that in the near future, we will discover this, or we will know of these longevity drugs that allow us to preserve health and extend health span in human beings. Yes.
Great, thank you. Another question, maybe for both of you, Svitlana first. Why do you think there is only a small number of biotech longevity companies or industries that will be successful? What is wrong with the current model, and how can we go about improving it? Maybe from a financial perspective and also a scientific perspective, does there need to be different funding schemes for the longevity industry and also academic research? And maybe the questions we are asking and the models we're using are not appropriate. So maybe Svitlana can comment first.
Well, there's nothing wrong with the fact that just only a small percentage of such company succeed at this stage. And moreover, I think if we had a high percentage, we probably would be asking too easy questions. Because by definition, we're very early stage in understanding aging and understanding the mechanisms. So the companies and research that aims at those targets is almost by definition moonshot. So it's we definitely have to continue investing. We will be getting small success rate. It's the nature of innovation, especially high risk innovation. Another question, of course, how do we help to improve those numbers? How do we accelerate this iteration cycle of test, failure, learning, and getting the positive results? And I think there are two parts of question. Firstly, from scientific standpoint, how do we progress more successfully? And I guess it's more question for Pedro. But as well, from a commercial perspective, we definitely can do things to speed up this process and to improve the chances. And one of the areas is that we are particularly looking at and how we can estimate the impact of particular research early in the phase on the economy, on the individual people and groups. And we can do that, or we can at least try to do that in various forms. Some traditional for venture capital industry, for example, methods that are usually dealing with high risk innovation is, for example, looking at patents, analyzing published work, the strengths of the team. But we also now have the opportunity to look at other creative ways of valuing such impacts. For example, looking at data, at personal data that research is using, its toolbox, its unique approach that may not be patentable or patented yet, but we still can analyze and quantify that potential impact.
Okay, thank you, Svitlana. Maybe Pedro, some closing comments just to address that as well.
So, so first of all, the issues in terms of low success rate in pharmacological industries is not just in aging. I mean, it happens in cancer. It happens in, well, Alzheimer's. The rate of success in Alzheimer's disease drug discovery is terrible. So, and there are intrinsic reasons for that. One of them is that we don't understand biological systems well. I mean, we don't understand human biology. That is a problem. There are diseases we can understand. I mean, COVID is understandable. You have a virus which has a certain number of genes that it infects human cells and then it replicates. It's understandable. But when you're looking about complex diseases like Alzheimer's disease, and when you're looking at a process like aging, we don't understand it at the biological level well. Keep in mind, there's lots of genes that we don't know what they do in the human body. So we have a lot of uncertainty in human biology to begin with. So when we're trying to fix human biology, let's put it that way, we're basically shooting in the dark. I mean, that's exactly what we're trying to do. I mean, we kind of guess, oh, I think that bit there is going to be important, but we don't really know. It is all shot in the dark. And we can take approaches like, I talk about in silico approaches, bringing in human data. There are a lot of approaches. I mean, if you look at traditional pharmacological drug discovery, that's what they do. Drug development, that's what they do. They try to reduce risk, but they're not perfect. None of them is perfect. And that's why we have a lot of attrition. In other words, a lot of compounds that go into trials that fail. And in aging, we have the additional problem that we don't understand well human aging. It remains a mystery of biology. So from a research perspective, there's still a lot of hurdles we need to overcome.
Great. Thank you very much, Pedro. I share your thoughts exactly. We need less shooting in the dark and more academic industry partnerships to do the real groundbreaking research. We are making headway. It's not that we are always in the dark. There's a lot more light coming in now, but we still have a long way to go. And through our academic and industry partnerships, this is the way to progress. And we have seen over the past year through the pandemic, these academic industry partnerships have really broken new ground in the speed in which therapeutics and the vaccine has been developed. So we look forward to working with our partners, and at King's through ARK, we have many partnerships, not only in the pharmaceutical sector, but also in the FMGC, the goods, consumer goods. These are also frontline workers through the supermarkets. We've all been there. They have been essential. So we also partner with consumer goods companies, and we have a innovation hub with Unilever, where we're trying to tackle some of these healthy aging research questions from the consumer and the community perspective, not only clinical therapeutics of curing age-related diseases, but how we can remain healthy and well into old age. So with that, I'd like to thank our speakers, Svitlana and also Joao Pedro, and all of the attendees for tuning in today, wherever in the world you are tuning in from, and also those of you who are listening in to the recording. Thank you very much, and we will be posting our future events online through LinkedIn and Twitter and the King's website. So thank you very much to all of you for joining us this afternoon.